full of them.
Hello and welcome to Wrestling and Everything, Coast to Coast, with your hosts, Buddy Sotelo Esquire and Mike Leno, and our third wheel, but not makes us a strong tricycle. That's Jonathan Schwartz from Slam Wrestling, and we hopefully will add another guest too, but we'll see how that works out. So thanks everyone for being here this week, and Jonathan, you recently went to an AEW show. Is that correct?
I did. It was the Wednesday night taping of AEW Dynamite, their first show up in Toronto, and one of the first events we've had here in about 3 years, since our COVID protections have been pretty strong for a little bit longer than they were down in the States. Certainly it's the first event that I've been to in the last 3 years, and probably my first night out of the house in that long. And I had a great time. My friend Elliot Silverstein, who I'm going to give a big shout out to, got me the tickets, and we went and we just had a blast.
Now you got to see also, and I'll shut up in a second, did you stay for the Rampage taping? And our guest hopefully joins us, but for everybody that knows Trevor Blanchard through the CAC, he's been going a jillion years. Evan knows him. Evan called me. Just want to let folks know, most of these Sundays he's to major reggae concerts. So he called me from the subway en route. But anyway, Jonathan, did you stay for the Rampage as well as the full Dynamite?
So unfortunately, Rampage taped on a second night on Thursday. So I wasn't around for that, although I kind of wish I was, because there were a few acts that were on that show that I really would have liked to see. There were a couple of new signings for AEW. I'm not.
Oh no!
Jonathan froze up a little. Maybe he'll unfreeze.
Uh-oh.
I'm not. I thought, because I saw some of the same signs.
You're back. You froze for a few seconds there.
Sorry about that.
So continue explaining what you were just about to say, Jonathan.
So I'm not sure where I froze, but they actually taped Rampage as a second night on Thursday. I'm sorry I did miss it because there were a few debuts, and notably the Kingdom from ROH has started appearing on AEW. I guess their contract with Impact ran out, and so now they've started there. And I think that has great potential to be an interesting storyline, since they've already got former members, Matt Hardy, who's kind of not doing much given that Jeff's still off air, and Adam Cole, whenever he comes back from injury, you could basically get the whole set minus TK O'Brien in. And, given the changing nature of factions within AEW storylines, that could actually be a pretty big impact on the broadcasts.
It's neat. So it's true, as they claim, that the Kingdom has never faced FTR before. So is that your understanding too? I'm not aware of them ever, certainly not in Japan and New Japan.
I don't think so. I don't think their time anywhere really overlapped until now.
And I think in Impact, Honor No More is kind of done, because I read, I don't know if it was Tuesday, that they were leaving along with, so it sounds like PCO and Kenny King might be the only ones staying.
And Eddie Edwards.
And Eddie, of course, because he's a long term. He's kind of the face of that company, really.
I'm always amazed that Impact has lasted as long as it has. I mean,
I hate to say it. I don't hate to say it. I'm happy. Great product. It is the last year, and maybe Jonathan can back me up, lots of New Japan talent coming in, and it's vastly improved from just seeing
Beer Money.
Well, no.
I like Beer Money.
Days were great. I'm just saying, like maybe 2 years ago, it was kind of it wasn't quite the talent pool that they have now. They have an excellent talent pool, and a lot of it is like almost per diem or per taping. They're not.
Well, I think the interesting thing there is, you read Keith Greenberg's book, Follow the Buzzards, recently as well, but I think Impact was really one of the biggest beneficiaries of the recent waves of releases that WWE had. Even if you go back before COVID, the whole run where Eric Young was released along with many others, Heath Slater as well being an example, Rhino, and they all turned up on Impact ahead of AEW. And I think that's kind of continued. I've got a bit of a weird conspiracy theory when you think about how much cross-pollination there's been between Impact and AEW and New Japan. I find, even to the extent that Frankie Kazarian recently called his shot to get a title match coming up on Impact. I kind of think that maybe Tony Khan is helping behind the scenes keep them afloat, much the same way that Vince McMahon and the WWE did with ECW when that was kind of a way station between the two big companies. But darned if I can prove it.
So our guest has joined us tonight.
You gotta love computers. You gotta love computers. Jonathan, very nice to see you and meet you. And Russ,
Nice meeting you.
nice to finally see your face. We've talked a couple times on over the phone. And then Dr. Mike Leno, man, you got a lot more gray hair since the last time I seen you, brother.
So, Mike, why don't you introduce our guest now?
Trevor Blanchard, a wrestler, longtime wrestler, referee, promoter, co-promoter, master, like Evan is, of press, of PR. He's, for Cauliflower Alley, he has many roles. He's overseen, Trev, I know you do much more than, running the shows, reffing. Your kids have reffed, and they continue to referee, as you've done for so many years, decades. And I think you were a big part, too, with the bowling, Flower Alley bowling tournament.
Yeah. Go ahead.
You do wear a lot of hats there, but you do globally, and you're a constant presence at all these shows. I don't know how many. This was Jonathan's first AEW show in Toronto the other Wednesday for Dynamite. But you've been to X amount there because you're right in the heart of things in Chicago.
Yeah.
Is that right? You've been seeing quite a few, and you know a lot of those talents because that's where Chris Daniels, for example, started before he finessed in Southern California. He started right at the Sammy DeCero's, I think.
Yeah, Windy City Wrestling. I actually assisted train Christopher Daniels. Also, I actually assisted in training Christopher Guy, Sexy Ace Steel, who was, I don't know if he's still with AEW after what happened back here in September with him and Punk and the fight with Twinkle Toes and the Bucks. And so I don't know. I hope he's still employed, but I don't know if you guys have heard anything as far as what's going on with that whole situation. But
knowledge that Ace Steel is still there. Did they let him go permanently?
I have no idea.
No, I'm asking.
All I know.
So we heard he let go.
There hasn't been anything official released just yet, but he did put out a tweet just recently to the effect that he's free. So read into that what you will. The other piece of news that came out of that recently, and again, I take all of this with a mine of salt until you actually see something happen on television. But in a press conference, Tony Khan had let slip that CM Punk actually had an office job, much like the Bucks or Kenny Omega, which I would imagine kind of complicates things depending on how much of it was an actual fight and how much of it was part of the show.
And it's weird, both of the monthly pro wrestling magazines out of London that are sold in the U.S. at a lot of Barnes & Noble stores, Wrestle Talk and Inside the Ropes, that's their cover issue, this AEW skirmish at the, the press conference, the post-press conference outside that room. And Ace Steel, super nice guy. And I should say Jonathan Schwartz, obviously a regular columnist with Slam Wrestling, the biggest, best, I think it's the best source on the planet for online things. If you want events like the CAC thing, there were photos up there, obituaries, reunions, fan fests, anything. That's kind of, the big one. As High Spots is sort of like wrestling's Amazon and eBay combined. That's what I think Slam is. So we'll get those plugs in. But Trev, so I didn't know you were, we'll add that to your list of accomplishments, training folks as well. Tell us how, you told me this story maybe 20 plus years ago. What was the first connection you had with pro wrestling? Like, did you catch it by accident? Did your friends or family turn you on to pro wrestling? What happened?
Well, let me throw one more name out there that I remember assisting training, Adam Pierce.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So he came through.
So,
he
yeah,
came through
that's-
Chicago. Yeah.
I've worked. I actually managed Christopher Daniels back when he was doing some stuff in APW, and we also had Adam
Yep.
Pierce on a couple of our shows, and both of those guys were great. So you did a good job training them. I'll give you credit.
Well, I'm not going to take all the credit as far as training him. Sonny Rogers was the guy. That's who Adam signed up with. And if you remember a referee by the name of Joseph Fuhr,
Oh yeah.
he was he's Adam's friend. They both came in. There was another kid, but he didn't last. But Adam and Joe toughed it out, and obviously you know where Adam is now, and you know where Ace is, and
Oh, Chris is-
yes, yeah, Chris Daniels, and so but yeah, getting back to your question, Mike. I remember seeing wrestling here in Chicago, and it was the AWA stuff. 78, 79, I was probably like 9 or 10 years old or whatever. And then it was 81, maybe 82. My dad finally took me to a show at the famed International Amphitheater, which is unfortunately no longer here. And another place that's unfortunately no longer here is the Sportatorium in Dallas. I was actually down there on Thursday because I actually am an employee with Southwest Airlines, and I went down there to see our headquarters. And I went by where the old Sportatorium was, and just kind of walked around in the grass and just remembering seeing all that stuff in the 80s with the Von Erichs and the Freebirds and Chris Adams and Austin, and so. But it was 81, 82. My dad took me. I don't remember the undercard, but the main event was Texas Death Match, Bruiser Brody versus Dick the Bruiser. That was my very first match. Back then they didn't have guardrails. They had the Andy Frayne security guards that would walk in a V, and the wrestlers were there to and they walked them through the crowd to the ring, and it was just something about that just was cool to me. And then the evolution of cable in 84, 85 opened my eyes to, I knew who Flair was, and I knew that there was wrestling across the country. I knew there was stuff out of New York. We were able to get Southwest Championship Wrestling on one channel late, like probably 1, 2 o'clock in the morning here in Chicago with Joe Blanchard. And with the expansion of cable, it opened my eyes to the NWA or Georgia Championship Wrestling, and it was watching the whole. I was a huge Horseman fan, and obviously, and it was something that how they portrayed their lives across on TV during their interviews and stuff is like, man, that would be life. Limousines and flying Learjets and the women and everything else, and it was just something that I was telling people in 8th grade, guys in 8th grade, that I was either going to be a pro baseball player or a pro wrestler, and the baseball thing didn't work out. I had actually had open tryouts with the Cincinnati Reds and the Pittsburgh Pirates right out of high school. I played second base and pitched, and the Reds liked me. They invited me down as a walk-on in the following spring, and I was playing football with guys from work from a grocery store, and tackle, no pads. I had 2 guys fall on top of me and dislocated my right shoulder and separated the joint. That happened on a Sunday. Tuesday, I was laying on the operating table, getting my right shoulder fixed, and I couldn't throw a ball like I used to, and there went my opportunity. So I wound up falling into wrestling. Girl I was dating at the time, her personal trainer at the gym was thinking about getting into it. Gave me the number, and called and talked. I don't know if I first talked to Sam or if it was Mike Gratchner. And Mike Gratchner is a photographer here in the Midwest. He worked with Vern for years. And I went in and talked to them, and then pulled some money out of profit sharing and went in there with a check of $2,500 and started training in April of 1990. Had my first match in July of 90. The funny thing is that somebody didn't show up. It was at a mall outside of Chicago in one of the suburbs. And I walked in, and Mike was like, you got your gear? And I'm like, yeah. He was like, okay. He was like, come on. And took me to the dressing room. And the funny thing was, or the thing that made me really nervous, was that we were actually in separate dressing rooms in this mall, on one side of the ring and then the other. And so I'm wrestling Gigolo Johnny Mercedes, who had gone to several CAC events. Was really good friends with Carmine DeSpirito and Frankie DeFalco up in Milwaukee. Wrestled a lot up there. So I get in a ring, and mind you, I've never met Gigolo Johnny Mercedes. We didn't meet until we actually got in the ring, and unfortunately, he passed away about 3-4 years ago. And I had mentioned this at his wake. His ex-wife wanted whoever was there to go up and kind of tell a story about Mark, or funny story or something. And what I told the people at his service was, that story, and that we had never met. And I didn't actually meet him until about 3 weeks after the match. But at the time I didn't know, but it was probably a couple of years after that I realized what he did for me. And the only thing he knew was that I knew the basics. The only thing I knew going into the match was he was going to pin me with perfect plex. He could have beaten. Can you guys swear on here or no? Is it cool to? No F-bombs or anything, but he could have kicked my ass. And
we don't have kids that watch this.
Okay,
thing, so.
I wasn't sure. I just want to make sure. I don't want FCC coming after us or anything. But no, he could have kicked my ass and not given me anything. And again, at the time, I didn't realize what he did. It wasn't until a couple of years later about how humble and gracious he was. He allowed me to drop kick him, chop him, hip toss him, arm drag him, drop kick him, when he didn't know me from Boo, and he could have just, taken over the match and just, used me as a piece of meat. And he was so gracious and humble and giving. Like I said, I realized that. And I saw him about 3 weeks before he had passed, while he was in hospice. And, I had thanked him, but it wasn't as meaningful as when I was sitting next to him while he was laying in bed, about, realizing what he did for me. And so that was 1990, July 1990. And I believe it was a little bit, probably about 4 or 5 years later, late 96, early 97, I had done some TV with the defunct now AWF, where they did the round system. I think, Mike, you'll probably remember that. I don't know if John or Russell, if you guys remember the AWF.
Was that the Sergeant Slaughter version?
Yeah, Tito.
Okay.
Tito was involved in it, and they brought up. He was a money mark, is what the guy was. Him and his mom were the ones who invented something with this. They actually invented the ATM card and the machine. They were the ones without the chip, pre-chip. They were the ones who invented the ATM card with the ATM machine, and obviously he made millions off of it, and he burned millions while he was running that show, because he was actually paying people. He was paying for extras to sit in the audience, like $50, $175 a person to sit in the audience, and we probably had 300 people at these tapings.
Wait a minute, by round system, and Jonathan can appreciate this. Well, two things. The AWF must be synonymous with, I hate to use the term because they're usually well-intentioned, towards Zari's AWF, that I did stuff for, but round system, were they wise enough to know like British round system? Because like in LA for just television, they actually called it, sometimes Jimmy Lennon Sr. would call it, this match is under the Australian round system or the Australian/British round system. I don't know if anybody, say in Ontario, ever had rounds. Was that, Trevor, the round system we're talking about? And no.
It was a round system. It was like, I don't know,
30-second break.
3 minute or 4 minute. I don't recall. I never went past first round. I put Michael Hayes over. I put Chris Adams. I put Sarge over. I put Coco Beware over, and it was all under the 3 minutes or whatever it was. I was just there to do the job and get paid. And so I know some of the matches with like Bob Orton or whoever, those went 2 or 3 rounds, or with Tito. I don't recall the
pausing it for a minute, however long, is kind of awkward. Do you remember it being? And also, let me ask this quickly and then throw open to the other guys. When you saw your first match, Brody against Bruiser, was Frank allowed to use the name Bruiser Brody, or was he King Kong Brody, as he was in St. Louis, as a favor to Dick the Bruiser, who didn't want him?
I think it was Bruiser, because it was a Battle of the Bruisers. I still have all those amphitheater posters that they had printed up. With the guys' faces.
Giant posters.
Yeah.
And the program page. And
yeah, they were only like $1.50, $2. I remember.
And those were Bob Blues. Bob Blues was the promoter legend, and
Chicago promoter or man or whatever. He talked up the shows and everything.
Yeah, he was the figurehead. It was kind of a strange, Jonathan, if you've heard of, I'm sure you know this, it was a joint effort between Gagne's AWA and Dick the Bruiser's WWA out of Minneapolis, and for 3-4 years, Detroit as well.
Detroit and Indianapolis. Bruiser ran out of Indianapolis.
Right, but he did try taking on the Sheet from 71 to 70, almost late 74 in Detroit as well. So, which was weird. His home base was Indianapolis, but it was a joint effort between 2 promotions, and both Bruiser and Vern were great friends with Muchnick, who would sometimes send in Pat O'Connor. Like I shot Pat O'Connor in a 20-minute Broadway against Ray Stevens there. But let me shut up and throw to you and see if obviously Jonathan and Russ have questions.
I'm just going to thank you for your service in the AWF. I think I'm one of the few. I have to admit, I remember when the AWF came on, we used to get it on through syndication up here.
Yeah.
It ran I think it only ran for 1 season at least that we got. And it was basically for people who loved guys like Bob Orton or like Tito Santana, or Sergeant Slaughter was positioned as the big babyface main eventer there. And just really, there wasn't as much of a forum to see them. This was around the time that the AWA had folded. WCW was still kind of in the doldrums with the Ding Dongs and the Cole Twins on the Power Hour every 2 weeks. It was not a high water mark for wrestling as a whole. But what was cool about the AWF was it was a chance to kind of keep those names that you wouldn't necessarily see in either spot, and also a bunch of young up-and-coming people. It's kind of, for me, it's kind of in that space along with the WXO, where you would have, again, kind of older, more established talent, but was also a place to see guys like Scoot Andrews or Billy Fives, who were just kind of coming up into the scene, while keeping, Kurt Hennig worked there. Ted DiBiase was at least the figurehead who was bankrolling it. You had Chris Cruz, who left WCW, was the announcer there, and Stan Lane. It was basically kind of keeping a lot of talent who otherwise might have faded a little bit still in the public eye. And I remember watching the AWF matches with my dad, and most of them wouldn't really go beyond that kind of first. It was 5-minute rounds with a 1-minute round in between, and very few of them actually went. The only one that I remember actually going to a full kind of 3 rounds was a best of 3 falls match for the AWF championship between Tito Santana and Bob Orton. Bob Orton won. Tito Santana was the inaugural champion, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, he still has the belt. He still has the belt. Yeah.
And I mean, the whole thing was you were setting up for this chase with guys like Tito or Sergeant Slaughter. I think this was before Slaughter moved on to his Iraqi gimmick in the WWF and ultimately won that championship. But it wasn't to be. There was this whole kind of chase set up, and as seems to happen with promotions every now and again, it just kind of was on my screen one week and off the next. So thank you.
I mean, we taped. We were probably there 8 to 10 hours. We did one. The Chicago. I don't know if they still have it, but they had Chicago had like a movie set theater that we actually wound up going to, and that's where we did the first initial tapings for them. And it was an all-day affair. They fed us and stuff, catering and everything. And I probably wrestled 3 times on the show. And then we wound up going out to a place called the Pheasant Run a few months later in St. Charles. And unfortunately, that building just burned down over the summer. It was actually for sale. The property was for sale, and the building hadn't sold yet, but a fire happened, and supposedly some homeless people or something like that, but who knows. But we did 2 different tapings there, and within like 3 months, and I mean, I got paid decent, but yeah, they did a show at Cicero Stadium in Cicero, Illinois, which is obviously just outside of Chicago, not too far from Midway Airport. And they did well at the show. And then I do know that they wound up going down to Florida, and they tried to do taping, or they did tapings down there, but they weren't like obviously flying any of us from up here in Chicago down. They flew a couple of guys that were helping out backstage, like this one guy wound up. He was a guy who was just keeping time, and they flew him down and paid him and gave him a hotel room. And he was like, yeah, it's the best week I've ever had. And, because he got paid and had a hotel in Florida, and, so, but yeah, Paul Apperstein, who owned it.
I remember that name.
You remember him? Yeah. He was going through money hand and foot, and all the boys knew it. Tommy Rich and whoever wound up going, they were probably making $2,000 to $3,000 a day or per match or whatever. I don't, but I know that somebody that's money mark, and you can ask for $5 or $6 or $7 or $1,000. He's a money mark and he's a wrestling fan. They're going to wind up paying those guys, and that unless you're bringing in the amount that you're spending, if you're not breaking even or making a profit, that money ain't going to last forever. And that's what happened. I mean, I saw Paul one time at a casino out in Joliet. I happened to be there and with some friends and walking by, and there's Paul sitting at the blackjack table, and we talked briefly, and I think it was like less than a year later he wound up passing.
So a couple of it. One is I just got done watching the Blues Brothers with my daughter a couple weeks ago. So and I will say that east of Denver and west of Pittsburgh, the only thing worth anything in the United States is Chicago.
Chicago. Oh, thanks.
Chicago's one of my all-time favorite cities. Spent a lot of time at the Kingston mines, brain cells that will never come back because of I kept drinking there, kept waiting for the 2:00 call, like we have in California. I kept waiting for them to say last call, and then 4 a.m. passed, and I was like, are they ever going to say last call? And they say, you don't have last call in Chicago. It's
Yeah,
just
some places do, some places don't.
not
Here's a
fine.
funny story about it. You brought up the Kingston Mine. Here's a funny story about that. So have you guys ever heard of Jim Cornelison? He sings the anthem for the Chicago Blackhawks, but he's also done it for the Bears and across the country. Last time I was there, I'm friends with him. Last time I was there there to see his son. His son plays guitar in a band, and they were there at Kingston Mine. That was probably 4 or 5 years ago, I think, something like that. So
It's nice to know it's still around. But
yeah.
I wanted to ask you, you had so many talents that you worked with. Who was your favorite one to work with in the ring?
Out of all the companies I've worked with,
Yeah.
name wise, Chavo Guerrero, hands down.
Really?
That matches on YouTube. Chavo Guerrero versus Trevor Blanchard. I remember, he knew who I was, and I was close to Eddie, and eventually became really close with Chavo. And I remember every match that I worked with WCW, what city and building and all the particulars. We were at the Dane County Arena up in Madison, Wisconsin, and I seeked him out, and I'm like, "Hey, Chavo," I says, "we're working tonight," and he's like, "Oh, how long you been working?" I says, "I think I had been in already in 7 or 8 years. It was 97 or 98," and so we talked a few things out, but everything else was pretty much, we called it in the ring, and that was the first time that when I came back through the curtain, I was getting pats on the back by Sully, Kevin Sullivan. Jimmy Hart was real happy with the match. Arn Anderson was happy with the match. And it was at that point, I'm like, wow, am I going to be able to get signed? Even if I was just going to be doing, the TV matches, that would have been cool to, go every week or every other week and be flown out and do those shows and get paid decent and obviously come home, because I was working in the grocery retail industry at the time. I was working at a grocery store, and but the whole thing with WCW, they had done a Indianapolis Nitro. It was either Nitro or Thunder on a Tuesday night, and Wednesday night they were going to be in Peoria, Illinois, at the Civic Center. So I went to the building and went through the back door, and I saw Arn, and Arn was like, "Hey kid, you got your gear with?" And I'm like, "Yes, sir." He was like, "Go get it." And I'm like, "Okay." So I'm thinking, cool, I'm going to wind up working a house show. Okay, so he comes back, or I come back, go back in, and he told me, he was like, Sarge's back, Sergeant Buddy Lee Parker's back was messed up. Not sure if he's going to go. If he doesn't, you're going to wind up working Benoit. And I'm like, great, it's freaking great. Chris knew who I was from seeing me at the tapings, and so I'm waiting, and then eventually Sarge winds up doing a match, and they go out, and they were literally out there for like 3 minutes maybe or less. Sarge's back tightened up, couldn't move. Chris pinned him with, like, I don't even remember what it was, but I'm standing behind the curtain, and as one of the security guards, Chris, and the referee bringing Sarge back, go through the curtain, and he looks at me and he's like, "I'm sorry, kid, I should have let you work." Was what it was. So then after that, stuck around, and at the end of the night, Arn came up to me and he said, "Hey kid, how far is Chicago from here?" Now, it's about 2 hours and 25 minutes, 2.5 hours. I told him it was only like about an hour and 20. So he is like, "All right, tell you what, because I know you're going to show up." He was like, "If we're within 5 hours of Chicago, I want you at the building." He was like, "If you work, you'll get a check 2 weeks later. If you need a hotel, I'll make sure you get our discount through Turner or whatever. If you don't work, you'll still get the hotel discount if you're not going to drive back. Just make sure you fill up on your gas, give me the receipt and I'll double your gas. So I was basically, I had a tank free out there and I had a tank free back home. And back then gas wasn't as high as it is now. But it was a handshake agreement with Arn, and then whenever they were within 5 hours here in the Midwest, I was there. Because Arn knew he can count on me to be there. And if I needed to put somebody over, they knew that I would do it,
So just kind of trying to go off memory here. It's unfortunate you didn't get to work with Chris Benoit, but you did get to work with Finlay.
Yes. Oh, you saw that match.
So big WCW fan back in the day. I remember. So when I heard you were going to be the guest,
you remember the hair, right?
I remember that, and I always, kayfabe being what it is, you never quite know which wrestling families are real. So I recognized the name, and I was always kind of, who knows. But I remember you and Fit Finlay, and you and going from Sublime to Ridiculous, I guess, Van Hammer and Disco Inferno.
Yep.
Those are and Chris Daniels a bunch of times, but it seems like you guys kind of ran into each other up and down the scene.
So first time I worked with WCW was Green Bay, Wisconsin, the Royce Center, right near Lambeau Field. It was cold out, I remember, and it was the first time I had met Page, DDP, and he was wearing that long fur coat that Dusty Rhodes had worn on TV with Magnum, and Page had wound up buying that, and he was wearing it up in Green Bay. It's freaking hilarious. So I walk in and put my bag down, and I was walking somewhere backstage, and before they let people in, and Brian Hildebrand, Mark Christopher, walks up to me. It's like, Trevor Blanchard, hey, it's finally nice to meet you. I've seen you in the magazines. Mark knew his history of workers, and I was just shocked that here's a guy on a national level working with a national company. He knew who I was. I was like, wow, that's freaking cool. So my first match was with Disco, and put him over with the reverse figure 4. It was pretty cool having Dusty Rhodes call my match too, along with I forget who the other announcer was, but all I remember is I had a match called by Dusty Rhodes, So and then they came up to me and they actually
didn't get to go to the pay window though.
That's right.
Who used to pay? Wait.
It took a clubber in.
Sometimes it was Hebner, and then it was the SmackDown announcer Tony Chimmel that would give the envelopes to the boys in WWFE. Who did it in the? I can't even remember who did it in WCW.
WCW. We filled out the paperwork and we got checked 2 weeks later.
Oh, okay. It wasn't at the show.
Yeah, there was no advance or anything like that.
Well, very quickly, on Brian Hildebrand was another brother of mine dating back to the late 70s. Before we lost him, and then Les Thatcher did those benefits for him and Pillman. But Hildebrand also managed as heel Dr. Mean Mark Curtis. I think he used Curtis name, but he managed like all these Jersey Philly shows. I'd be shooting Cactus Jack against Eddie Gilbert, and he managed Terry Funk on some of those Tom Robinson benefits that Cora Luzo and the ECW precursor Todd Gordon, who was still with Joel Goodhart of TWA. They did these benefits, and he was on those all of those events, sometimes roughing, but not so much, like Scotty Dickinson, another ref out of the Boston area, you know very well from WCW. But Hildebrand was one of those guys who would call us all like at 3 a.m. to talk wrestling, and you just pick.
He never called me at 3 a.m, but it was because he knew I had kids, so probably. But getting back to the Green Bay show. They asked me, they were like, hey, we need one more match. Are you good with that? I'm like, yeah, sure, whatever. I was willing and able to do, whatever I needed to do. And they says, all right, well, you're going to wind up working Mean Mike Enos. Like, okay, it's cool, right? So I don't remember a whole lot about the match, but I do remember the finish and then what happened after. So he pinned me with a power slam off the ropes. And when I would take that, I would jump up as if I was doing a vertical, which is, You jump up and the guy runs in between your legs and then hits the other ropes. So I would jump up like that straight, and he caught me and boom, and he pinned me, and he was like, wow, that was freaking great, man. Thanks. I'm like, okay, as he's getting up and he's kind of walking around, and I'm slowly starting to, like come to, and he picks me up, and he's like, take another one. I'm like, okay. Boom. Take another one. Boom. Last one. Okay. Right. I'm like, whatever. I had no idea what he was doing. He told Mark Curtis was the ref. He told Mark, he was like, reverse the decision, raise the kid's hand. I was like, because in the back when we were kind of going over some things, he was like, where'd you train at? I'm like, in Chicago, with Sonny Rogers and Sam Denny. He's like, oh, Sonny, I love Sonny Rogers. And so that's what helped me, I guess, put me over with him. And then the way what I did for him in the ring, he just wanted to make sure that I got my arm raised in front of the crowd, even though they were able to edit that out and just show the first one where he pinned me and then got his arm raised, which I thought was freaking cool,
Let me say this about Sonny Rogers quickly, and then we'll ask Russell what I want you to talk about what happened at CAC this year. Sonny Rogers, who was, a lot of folks saw, the tail end of ESPN's AWA jobbing, etc. When Steve Regal also, I'm talking about the American Chicago, I think he was from Chicago, Steve Regal.
Indianapolis,
okay.
Yep.
Sonny Rogers was long rumored to be Buddy Roberts' half-brother. Buddy Roberts, who I first met and started in Montreal as part of the original Hollywood Blondes with Jerry Brown, managed by Oliver Humperdinck. And then, of course, everybody knows him better in World Class as, part of the Freebirds and his whole many years there. Do you know if that was true? He was very well known, but was he related in any way to Buddy, who eventually passed from throat cancer? He had a voice box. We saw him at CAC. You were there with him.
Yeah, no. As far as I know, there's no relation. No relation between
Let's get into CAC, because I wanted to see, this was a big deal because women have not had as much of a role. Sometimes we'll give one or two female awards, since I've been around CAC since '87. But this was thankfully the first time a female, Medusa, Debbie Michelli, was MC. Was it Rizzi by himself last year as MC? Do you remember?
No, who was with? Yeah, actually, I think John was by himself last year. Because Debbie, last year Debbie got the Mike Mazurki award.
Yeah. And
then, but I think she actually helped. She helped Tuesday night because she got her award on Wednesday night.
Yeah.
So I think because of how well they gelled is the reason why she wound up co-hosting or emceeing along with John this year. And she did a great job.
Now,
Peter worked on his show, I think, either in the Philippines or South America or something like that back in the mid '90s. But who were the honorees? Like, there's a lot of Memphis and Jacqueline, who starred as Miss Texas in all places, Memphis. Most everybody. Oh, that's the program I was bugging you for.
Yep. I do not have an extra one, Mike. I got to the Tuesday. They normally would give these out on Wednesday. And they had them out on Tuesday, and I got down there late from my hotel room. I was just taking my time, and I was sitting with Al Burke from California, and then Sabrina and Naya Kennedy from New York, my New York girls. So I was not able to get another one for you, so I apologize.
Right. I'll pay you to take a cell phone picture of all of them, but let's see JBL next to Jacqueline. Who else was on there?
Jerry Lawler, Sullivan, Conan, Tommy Rich, and the Rock and Roll. So Tuesday night they did the tribute to Memphis, which they changed it. It was it's been the Bachwinkle blowout, but they changed it for this year because Memphis was so prominent in that. So I mean, Jimmy Hart was there.
Well, now we have Tales of the Territories. So
yeah, it was pretty much,
ties in well with the Tales of the Territories. But this was the first time for many of them. Jimmy Hart's been to many. but Jerry and Jeff Jarrett, first-timers, Conan first-timers, Jacqueline first-timers, and Jacqueline started in Memphis. Was she part of that Tuesday night, Jacqueline? Because she started there. Or is Miss Texas?
No, she got the female award wrestler, but more so with her from her start in Texas and then her WWE stuff. I don't recall if they mentioned much about her being in Memphis.
I shot her there. She was part of that USWA that mixed with Jarrett and Fritz leftovers in Dallas, where they would tape in Memphis, but also Dallas.
Chaz Taylor was there.
Wow.
Tugboat Taylor's son. He was there from US, obviously USWA. Who else was there? Jeff Jarrett. It was his first time. Jerry Lawler's been there before.
Yeah.
Jerry Jarrett was actually there as well.
Did they have a roundtable panel or something with them just talking about Memphis? How did Tuesday go? The night before the main awards Wednesday.
Basically, they were Jerry told stories. Jeff Jarrett told stories. They gave an award to you remember Teeny, Christine Jarrett. They gave an award to her grandson that Tuesday night. Ricky and Robert got the tag team award. They were talking about, they talked about Memphis and stuff. And
Tommy Rich. Tommy Rich.
Yep. Here's a funny story. So Jeff Jarrett was up there and he had mentioned about his dad. His dad thought they were getting it Wednesday night. He was actually upstairs sleeping for the award for Tuesday night. So he didn't make it down until Wednesday for the banquets. That was kind of a funny. Everybody got a chuckle out of that. So, but I mean they told great stories, and they talked about the Lawler Kaufman great storyline angle and everything. And
did they say anything? What was in the second Tales of the Territories from the strictly?
No, they didn't. They mentioned that it was on Vice, but they didn't go into any detail as far as what's going to be in the first episode, what's going to be in the second one. So, and I've only seen the first one, which was really good.
Well, the Kaufman thing is must watch too. And then this Tuesday on Vice on Tales from the Territories at 7 Pacific, I'm not sure if it's the same time Eastern, is AWA, but they've got Medusa. They mislabeled. They showed graphic of Jimmy Brunzell talking. They had, as the identifier Steve Olsenowski, when it was obviously Jumpin' Jim Brunzell. I think Tara is part of that. I don't know if Greg Gagne. I'm assuming Greg must be part of it.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I would think. Maybe Mick Karch is involved in it. What's his name? George Shire. What's his name? George
Shire.
Yeah.
And also Wednesday night, the main awards, Ray Jr., who debuted last year, came to his first CAC to get an award. He presented to Conan. Can you tell us how that went?
It was really some information that I never knew. I guess Ray was, because there's an age difference between Conan and Ray, and Conan had already been in the business, and Ray was like 13 or whatever, was hanging around Conan and stuff. And unfortunately, Conan is going through some health issues. I guess he's going through dialysis. I guess he needs a kidney, and he did not look really good. You can see it in his face that he was, he's not doing well, but hopefully, he'll be able to get a new kidney and
he's had that before. Over the last 15 years, he's had kidney ailments.
I wasn't aware of it until, last month.
Yeah, that's why he stopped wrestling, pretty much after TNA. And he came back. He had kidney ailments then. Any
Was he a big drinker or no?
No. Sometimes it can be familial, genetic, hereditary.
Yeah.
Hey, Mike, well, we have a couple minutes left. I wanted to ask Trevor a question about, Chicago as a territory. We run along across people all across the United States and the world, and I always want to find out what makes their territory special. What is it about Chicago that makes Chicago style of wrestling and the kind of stuff that you do in Chicago different than what you'd see in, say, Memphis or St. Louis or Minnesota or some of the other territories we've covered?
Well, we do a thing called the Midwest Reunion here in Chicago it used to be in the spring, but because of COVID and everything, now it's the last couple of years it's been in September. But if you were to do a tree as far as Chicago wrestling, it would start with Sonny Rogers and Sam DeCero. And from there, it would just branch out. Sonny left Sam, was training at PWI, Pro Wrestling International. That was his company. That's where Adam Pearce came through. Joe Fuhrer came through. And then from Windy City, you had Ace Steel and Danny Dominion, who eventually worked with Ed Hillier up in Minneapolis with Steel Domain. They opened up a school. From there, that's where Punk went to. And now Punk was a yarder to begin with a company called LWF. And they drew. They had a good, 3-4 years that they were drawn really, really well. Then, like I said, then you have Punk. Colt Cabana started with a guy, Rockin' Randy Ritchie, who did TV for WWF. And he actually started with Windy City as well. So as far as what stands out, what makes Chicago unique, it all came from Sam DeCero and Sonny Rogers, and has just filtered out and out and out and out on as a huge tree, to where Jimmy Blaze, who owns POW Entertainment, who I am his events coordinator and kind of like his second right hand man for the company. Jimmy now he's had his company. We're actually November 5th, we're doing Wrestle Rage 20 years of Wrestle Rages. We're already sold out, and we just announced today that we're going to be on pay-per-view for the people that aren't able to make it, which is a first for us as well. Jimmy has his own school. So now there's guys. So again, it starts with Sam and Sonny, and it's just filtered out to different people that have gotten training from Sam and Sonny, to like Jimmy and myself and Ace Steel and Dominion branched out. There's a guy by the name of Adrian Lynch who got trained by Sonny, and then people from that side of Sonny branched out, started their own schools and their own companies. And so, I mean, you can go back all the way to like 1988, as far as when people started training with Sam, that are either still in the business in some way, shape, or fashion. They might be promoting. There's a guy by the name of Frankie Tyrant who runs out in Princeton, Illinois, a couple times a year, benefit shows. So the one thing that I can say is that if you got training in Chicago and it wasn't anybody affiliated through Sam DeCero and Mike Granchner, Sonny Rogers, who had come through that school, one of those schools, Windy City or PWI, I wouldn't say that you weren't trained the right way, but the training is different. There's more of an old school mentality on the training from Sam and Sonny.
Trev, we're winding up. We want to have you both, you and obviously Jonathan, plug away. Jonathan, we will talk more and just let you talk away on AEW and your experience at your first Dynamite in Toronto, which was a huge deal. Lots of things happening there, and they are going to make that a regular part of Tony Khan's. You know, they're going to be returning very soon because they were happy.
I would hope so. I just wanted to say to answer Russ's question earlier, just in terms of what makes each wrestling hotbed special. I'm just going to put it out there. In a recent column, I spoke about how very often many cities and up here in Canada are very different in terms of how we respond to wrestling compared to what we see in the States. First off, we certainly have our own local promotions that we're rabid fans of. It's always great whenever we see hometown talent make good, going back to whether it's, the Hart family, the Rougeaus, Edge and Christian most recently, Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn. I mean, we take our successes to heart. And I imagine that's the same for any city, that whenever you see a guy make it onto the biggest stage possible, and you have that feeling of, oh, well, I saw this guy in UWA in Mississauga in a repurposed livestock barn in front of 25 guys, and then you get to see them, walk the ramp at a WrestleMania or at an All Out or anything like that. It's a wonderful feeling. One thing I will say, just kind of as a Canadian wrestling fan, we've long had a reputation as kind of being bizarro world compared to the US markets. And I think it's fascinating. I think there was a lot of it. I don't know if you've seen the Dynamite episode this past Wednesday. Apparently I was on it in a crowd shot very briefly, fully masked. But we don't follow the script, which I think is an awesome thing from a fan's perspective. I don't know how, maybe you can speak to it better than I can from a performer's perspective, but, they're going to give us whatever storylines they want. They're going to present the characters however they want. We're going to cheer and boo for whoever we please. So one thing I really love about Canadian crowds, and it was really in full effect on Wednesday, was, Christian comes out, local boy, he's getting a cheer the whole way through. Luchasaurus comes out, who's supposed to be a big bad heel. Not here, he ain't. Chris Jericho comes out, wrestling probably one of the biggest baby faces in the company in Bryan Danielson, at least this week. We were chanting Y2J the whole time. That's actually the one thing that I questioned in terms of how the fans were responding, that there were a number of chants that struck me as interesting. So you have Jericho, who's been affiliated with AEW since the beginning, 3 years in, and people are still going with his WWE nickname. Or when Christian comes out, they're doing an Edge's Better chant. And I wonder if that actually made it to the broadcast, because, both of these guys have done phenomenal work since they're in AEW. Christian's mic work has been outstanding. Jericho's having a whole renaissance with his ROH run, which was actually the subject of my most recent column this past Sunday. Next up, I'm going to look at the bunch of returns since Triple H and Stephanie took over. But both of these guys are doing incredible work, and the fans are just celebrating them the way we know how.
Is Luchasaurus, before most of us discovered him in Lucha Underground, but is he from Canada? I don't know anything about him.
No, he's not.
He's from California. I met him on a show out in California that Billy Blade was running.
Wow, like in the Santa Barbara area. Wow. And I should say,
yeah,
he has a master's degree in history.
Really?
Which is awesome.
We'll discuss that on the next one. I'll bug you about that. Next show, Russ is booked Super Diablo. Well, I think it was in the very first class.
No, it's Chicano Flame.
Chicano Flame. I'm sorry. Chicano Flame. But of interest, though, from what we've all talked about tonight, Scrap Iron Adam Pearce, Chris Daniels, and no, I'm saying they were all on the King of the Indies, the very first thing that led to Ring of Honor. This was 2000. What was it? August of 2001, or maybe July 2001 tournament. But it was Daniels. Who else was in that thing? Because I mean, there was another name that we had mentioned coming out of Chicago getting finessed, and besides Scrap Iron and Chris Daniels, and Scoot, Black Nature Boy, Scoot Andrews, who was on those Alperstein things. He was from Florida, but he was on the King of the Indies Russ as well, that 2-night tournament in 2001.
And I had Vito Tomaselli. He did work in Chicago as well.
Yep.
And I remember him being on the show also.
All right, Jonathan is with Slam Wrestling. Everybody knows the site. Jonathan, do you want to give the best URL so people can go right to it?
Sure. I write the Wrestler's Court with Jonathan Schwartz column every 2 weeks on slamwrestling.net. My most recent one came out this past Sunday, where I basically look at why Chris Jericho as Ring of Honor champion counterintuitively is actually a really good thing. He's doing great work, and he's drawing eyes to the product that wouldn't normally be there, which I think is the name of the game, especially since the relaunch of ROH has not been without its challenges. This Sunday coming up, I'm thinking of looking at the rash of returns that have come back to WWE since Triple H and Stephanie have taken over. I think that a lot of what we're seeing at minimum is kind of a make good for some of the COVID era releases, which really left a bad taste in a lot of fans and people who watch wrestling's mouths. And it's good to see that they seem to be at least trying to make some of that right now. And from a fan's perspective, the fact that many of them are getting at least early meaningful programs and stuff to do that's worthy of their talents instead of meaningless comedy skits seems to be a great thing as well. So look for that coming up this Sunday on slamwrestling.net, Wrestler's Court with Jonathan Schwartz.
Wrestler's Court with Jonathan Schwartz. The big highlight from Raw was, of course, Good Brothers, and then the Brave thing to end the show. Well, maybe didn't open with the Good Brothers, but they came in. Big, nice surprise there since they left Impact. And then we saw the counter on AEW with the Kingdom going there. Trev, why don't you plug anything and everything you'd like to plug before we run out of time?
Yeah, I mean, just the POW Entertainment is spelled POWW Entertainment. It's on Facebook. I believe the link for the pay-per-view, our very first pay-per-view, will be up there tomorrow sometime. So if you want to see Chicago wrestling, you can log on to click on that link. I think it's like $15. I believe there's 9 matches. One of them is a battle royal. It's the Zebra Kid Memorial Battle Royal. Kevin was he was actually Gigolo Johnny Mercedes' manager in my very first match, and everybody loved Kevin, and we decided he passed away from cancer a couple of years ago, and we decided to do that in honor of him. So it's an annual thing, and we got this nice, really big trophy for it, and the nameplate can be taken off and replaced for whoever is going to be winning it. So I was actually the inaugural one who won it out of left field. Didn't even see it coming. Very emotional night. His sister wanted to make it, but she was very worried about COVID. She made it out there last year, and Tiny wound up winning last year's, and so his name is on that until November 5th, and then there'll be a new one put on there. So again, it's POWW Entertainment on Facebook. Like that page, and then, like I said, that link for the pay-per-view for $15. You'll be able to sit at home and watch it, especially if you're cross country or up in Canada or wherever around the world. We'd love to have you, and it's going to be a special night. Mike, you had mentioned about my boys. My older boy, Brian, has been refereeing for 10 years already, 10 plus, I think. He started when he was age 15. And then my younger son, Kyle, he actually is wrestling. He'll be wrestling for the JP. I forget who he's wrestling, but it's for the he's wrestling for a title that night. So he wrestles as Kazile. So
little Carney,
yeah, a little Kazarni, yeah, similar, yeah.
Wow, well, it's great to have you guys on this week. We'd like to have you on in the future.
Yeah.
Trevor, you know, especially.
I love talking history. Like Mike knows, when we go to Jack in the Box or the Egg and I in Vegas, we usually sit for a good hour and a half or so and just talk about the business and stories and everything. And so, yeah, I mean, Mike, let me know when you guys want me back. Again, I love the talk wrestling and this business and this industry. I mean, there's a lot of things that I wish it was back to when I started, having kayfabe and.
We'll have to save that for the next show. Save that for the next show. Anyway, it's great to see everyone. We've got to go this week, and we'll see everyone next week. So thank you very much for being here.
Take care,
Good night,
guys.
everyone.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Good night.